Hello everyone, today we are going to discuss threat modeling. How many of you know about threat modeling or is familiar with the term? A little bit about myself. My name is Siddhant Chouhan. I am a cybersecurity enthusiast currently working with VMware. I like to play capture the flag competitions. I am a community volunteer at Winja. I have done the OSCP certification. In my free time I like to play ukulele. I have written blogs related to Hack the Box and Try Hack Me. And there is my Twitter handle if you would like to connect with me on Twitter. We are going to be discussing about what is threat modeling, the stride threat model, and perform hands-on threat modeling using OWASP Threat Dragon. What is threat modeling? Before we discuss any definitions, I want you all to imagine that you're walking into a modern retail company store which has smart air conditioning units, which can be remotely controlled to monitor the store's temperatures. But they are also connected to the main store network. The smart AC has a built-in computer system. There are other endpoints also in the same network, such as smart self-service checkout solutions, which contains the customer's credit card information. The air conditioning units are not directly owned by this organization. In fact, they are owned by another third party to help them monitor the store's temperature. The smart AC gets compromised due to a vulnerability, and the attackers are now inside the network and are able to attack other systems as well. If the network had been properly segmented to keep the organization's network and the air conditioning unit machines separate, the attack would not have been so severe. So there is a need to look at the design and the architecture to find out issues. So threat modeling is a security engineering activity through which engineers identify threats, pinpoint design and implementation issues. The stride threat model. There is a requirement to categorize and classify different kinds of threats. The stride threat classification designates a threat category corresponding to each letter of the word stride. Can any of you make a guess what does each letter in the word stride stand for? S stands for spoofing identity. It means pretending to be someone or something other than yourself. For example, you are playing a game which is currently providing rewards to the people situated in Australia, and you are playing the game from India. You change your device settings to show that you are also in Australia and get access to the rewards. So this is an example of spoofing your location. Tampering. Tampering with data means modifying something on disk, data in rest, or data in motion. We are violating integrity in this case. An example can be you're sending a message to a friend and in between somebody tampers that data. This can lead to a misunderstanding. Repudiation means claiming that you did not do something or you're not responsible for an action. For example, you receive an email from your boss stating that you need to provide some privileged information to some third party, violating the company policy. But it's an urgent matter. You do it and then you later find out that the email was fraudulent. Repudiation would be your boss denying that he or she sent that email. Information disclosure. Providing information to somebody who is not authorized to access that information. For example, a website unintentionally discloses credit card details of their user, or improper backend logic leads to leakage of personally identifiable information, PII. Denial of service means exhausting the resources needed to provide a service. For example, an attacker purposefully tries to exhaust the site's resources, denying legitimate users the access. Elevation of privilege. It means allowing someone to do something they are not authorized to do. For example, a user is able to perform administrator functionalities by tampering with the cookies, the authentication tokens. Due to improper role-based access control, they are able to escalate their privileges from a normal user to a high-privileged user. Now let's perform hands-on threat modeling using OWASP Threat Dragon. Threat Dragon is a free open source threat modeling tool from OWASP. I'm currently using the standalone desktop application. This can also be used as a web application as well. Let's start by creating a completely new and empty threat model. The owner of the threat model, I'll put my name here, Siddhant. Reviewer, let it be Riddhi. High level system description. So we can just describe that this is a sample model. Yeah, that should be sufficient. A sample model of an employee leave management system web application. We can add contributors if we want, and we can add diagrams. I will add a new diagram. I'll call this as the main request data flow. I'll click on add. I'll save this. I'll open this diagram. Now we can start creating the data flow diagram. We can have several actors, processes, data stores, and then the data flows connecting them, and trust boundaries as well. Okay, so now we can have a legitimate client as an actor, which is interacting with a web application. I'm adding two data flows here. The client is performing web requests and interacting with the web application. The web application is in turn responding by sending web responses. We have a data store here. Let this be the database. The web application is performing queries to the database. And similarly, the database can then return the web application queries, the results of those queries. Here we are just creating the main request data flow of our application. We can also have that the web application is reading credentials from a web config file. And we can have a trust boundary stating that the client and any other actor are situated outside a trust zone. So let this be the internet. And yes, that's the sample request data flow of the application. We have our client performing a web request to the web application. The web application can generate a web response and send that back to the client. The web application is reading configuration settings and credentials from a web config. The web application can request queries on a database. The database in turn responds to those queries to the web application. And we have the internet as a trust boundary. So we can have multiple clients, and we can add more processes or data stores according to our software. Now I would like to tell you guys that whenever we perform threat modeling, we should keep 4 things in mind. At the highest levels, we can ask these questions: that what are we working on? What can go wrong? What are we going to do about it? And did we do a good enough job? So we are going to add threads to these elements. I'll start with the database. I'll add a new thread. The thread can be unauthorized access to the database. This can lead to information disclosure. I will keep this thread status as open, priority set to high. We can have a description about this thread. So we can write something like, if the credentials are retrieved by an attacker, they can directly interact with the database server, and this can lead to sensitive data disclosure. Mitigation will be use a firewall to only allow whitelisted IP addresses to interact with the DB server. I'll save this thread. Similarly, we can have a thread that this web configuration file which is storing credentials. This should be encrypted, right? So that's a thread. If it is not encrypted, we'll say web config needs to be encrypted. We can have information disclosure if the configuration file is not encrypted, and if it is obtained by an attacker, they can get access to the credentials. Mitigation will be encrypt the web config file, expire, and reissue the credentials for the database server. And if anybody would like to add more mitigations, they can do so. I'm going to set the thread status to mitigated and I'll set the priority to high. So similarly, we can add more threads. The basic idea is the more creative we are here, the better we identify threads in this data flow diagram, the better threat modeling report we'll be able to generate, and which will be helpful for the developers while they're coding or testing the software. Let's look at a sample threat modeling report. So this demo threat model is about a threat model sample of a web application with the queue decoupled background process. Let's look at the main request data flow. We can see the browser can make a web request to the web application. The web application in turn returns a web response. The web application is reading configuration from a web app config. The web application is querying the database. The results are being returned to the web application. The web application can put messages to a message queue, which can in turn interact with the background worker process. This background worker process is reading configuration settings from a worker config and can perform queries to the database, and the results will be fetched back to the worker process. So this is the request data flow. Let's look at the various threads which are modeled in this sample diagram. Okay, we have a thread. Credentials should be encrypted, as we had discussed before. The web application config stores credentials used by the web app to access the message queue. These could be stolen by an attacker and used to read confidential data or place poison message on the queue. The message queue credentials should be encrypted. Alright. Yeah, so we have two threats here. One is credential theft and one is unauthorized access. An attacker could make a query call on the database. Mitigation should be that require all the queries to be authenticated. So let's now create the report. We can say, do we want to show out of scope elements or not? Do we want to show mitigated threats? Do we want to include the threat model diagrams? I will say I don't want to show the out of scope items as of now. And we can have a look at this threat modeling report. We have the main request data flow. Then we have different threats. Let's look at a few of them. Work and config data store. Description. The accessing DB credential, this is a threat. It falls under the information disclosure category. The threat is currently open and is of high priority. We have a description and the mitigation as well. And similarly, we have all the other threats that we had discussed. The better threats we are providing here, the more secure software the developers will be able to make. Yes, this is a blue team activity. We are generating threats so that the software engineers can produce more secure software. This will be done in the design phase of the software development lifecycle. We can have a look at other threats. Web request data flow. The description for the threat is that the data flow should use HTTPS. Information disclosure category. This threat is mitigated and is of high priority. The description is these requests are made over the public internet and could be intercepted by an attacker. Yes, that is a valid threat. The mitigation would be that the request should require HTTPS. This will provide confidentiality and integrity. HTTP, which is a clear text protocol, should not be supported. And similarly, we have other threats along with the description and mitigation. Now, when you want to submit this threat modeling report, you can save this as a PDF. I will open this in Chrome. Okay, so this is the threat model report. This is the same as what we had seen earlier. Now you can submit this PDF to the software engineers. They can have a look at the threats, the mitigation, the severity, the priority, whether it's what category does it belong to, and then they can keep these threats in mind while developing their software. So yes, that will be all. The conclusion is the output of the threat model tells us about the decisions we might make in the subsequent design, development, testing, and post-deployment phases. When you perform threat modeling, we are brainstorming, we're thinking about the threats, we begin to recognize what can go wrong in a system. And the developers can fix the issues earlier in the software development lifecycle, which will save both money and time. Thank you, that will be all.